Okay, so today I am very pleased to have as our guest speaker Mr. Gary Hughes. I first came into contact with Mr. Hughes through the Refinery Transition Working Group, a group of people who discuss about the energy transition that California is going through and what we might do about it. Um, that group was very kind in opening up their meetings to some of my students in the past. And this semester, I reached out to them to see if any of them would be interested in presenting to my class this semester on the oil supply chain, the energy transition, because that's not information that is often taught in right now, and also there's not much that I think the average person doesn't know a whole lot about it, except what the price of gas is at the pump. So Mr. Hughes responded to that call, and we're very grateful to him for coming with us today. He is a co-director of the Americas program at Biofuel Watch. It's a civil society organization focused on climate, biodiversity, land, human rights, and public health impacts of large-scale industrial bioenergy. Today, he is going to speak to us on the California refinery pivot to biofuels, low carbon illusions, and bioenergy delusions. So thank you very much, Mr. Hughes, for spending your time here today with us. And just a note too to everybody in the audience, what we're going to do is Mr. Hughes is going to speak, and then we'll take a pause after about 15 minutes, and we'll take some questions. So you all know my students in the class are required to ask at least one question. So I'll be getting through them. Our guests are absolutely welcome to ask questions as well. And with that, why don't we go ahead, and Mr. Hughes, if you could take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Antinori. Thank you to everyone who is here. And I am trying to put things up here into full-on presentation mode. My name is Gary Hughes. I really appreciate this opportunity to collaborate with your course at San Francisco State University. And my interest here is to share some of the experience we've gained working around the conversion of refineries to making biofuels, refineries right here in the Bay Area. So I'll start with a little introduction about Biofuel Watch, and then I have a set of slides where we can try to get some vocabulary established around exactly what the refinery conversions are, and talk a little bit about the economics incentivizing the conversion. And we will do a set of questions, as Dr. Antinori was saying, just right about the middle of the slideshow. And then the second half, we'll really look at some of the feedstock issues, as well as the land use and human rights aspects that are really central to this conversion that we're seeing happen in the Bay Area of refineries to making liquid biofuels. Biofuel Watch is an international organization. We really are a small civil society climate justice organization. We work in the grassroots. We have a core of our team that's based in the United Kingdom, working on issues in the UK and Europe, and then globally. And then we have staff on the East Coast, and then myself here in California, where I work on issues in California and also internationally. One thing that I really want to share with everyone here is that we work in a number of really justice-oriented networks at a global level, but we focus very strongly, at least my work focuses very strongly in Sacramento, because Sacramento, the state capital of California, really has become something of a theater for international climate politics. And if the biggest polluters in the world see Sacramento as being very important, we encourage environmental organizations to also understand that Sacramento is important on an international level. So speaking of Sacramento, then let's start this out with just a quick run through of what I call California climate civics. to recognize that in 2006, the California Global Warming Solutions Act was passed. This was a very important marker in the development of California climate policy. And there were really a number of mechanisms that came out of that, but three real high level operating ways to implement California's climate policy. The renewable portfolio standard, which has been very effective. We've seen all the uptake, for instance, of solar energy and the expansion of real renewables for our electronic grid. Then we have the cap and trade program, the markets-based compliance mechanism, which I understand your class has looked at a little bit. And then the low carbon fuel standard, which is a mechanism that's designed ostensibly to reduce what they call the carbon intensity of transportation fuels. And it is this, the LCFS, that is really central to incentivizing the conversion of petroleum refineries to making liquid biofuels. CARB, as we call it, the California Air Resources Board, is the agency that's responsible for the implementation of AB 32. Just to recognize that CARB is part of Cal EPA. The chair and the majority of the CARB members are appointed by the governor, and then it's approved by the legislature. And then local air districts, such as our local air district here in the Bay Area, has a representative on the board of CARB as well. Now, we've talked about Cal EPA, but I really want to recognize the importance of the California Natural Resources Agency. The Natural Resources Agency is the primary regulator of oil and gas extraction and timber harvest in the state. It's also where the California Energy Commission is housed. Far less attention is paid to what's going on at the Natural Resources Agency than to what's happening at CARB, but it's equally important. So here we are. We have just a really rough sketch of some of the mechanisms that are at hand. California is considered a global climate leader. We're told again and again that California is showing the way on responding to climate. But what we're finding on the ground again and again and again is that we are still fighting against how our communities are being dedicated as sacrifice zones for the energy industry and for other really heavily impactful industrial sectors in our economy. And that includes the refining sector, where transportation fuels are made. In the San Francisco Bay Area, there are still 5 operating refineries. 5 years ago in 2020, 2 of these refineries began the process to convert from making petroleum-based fuels to making biofuels. These 2 refineries are the Phillips 66 refinery in Rodeo, right on the shores of San Francisco Bay, and then further back, outside of Martinez, in unincorporated Contra Costa County, is the Marathon Martinez refinery. And we'll also speak about Neste, who invested $1 billion in that refinery as a joint venture. So it's really important to recognize that there's 2 of 5 refineries in the San Francisco Bay Area that have converted now to making liquid biofuels. The Phillips 66 refinery and the Marathon Neste refinery in Martinez. Now, these refinery conversions we have come to see as really just being a way by which big oil has managed to squeeze more life out of toxic stranded assets. The Phillips 66 refinery, pictured here on the shores of San Francisco Bay, aspires to be the biggest biofuel refinery in the world. But just prior to the announced conversion of this refinery to making biofuels, P66 was trying really hard to bring tar sands, crude in from Canada by pipeline to the coast of British Columbia and then by tanker down to the San Francisco Bay Area, because this refinery is literally becoming stranded because the oil resources that were previously providing feedstock to this refinery, coming from the Santa Maria refinery in particular in south central California, basically doesn't have crude oil to provide anymore. The Santa Maria refinery has been shut down. So this refinery was basically being starved of feedstock, and then they pivoted to pursuing the making of biofuels. Now, let's talk a little bit about exactly what's going on with making biofuel. So, a biofuel refinery, as we're confronting it in the San Francisco Bay Area, we're talking about hydro-treated vegetable oil, or what's called hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids, so HVO or HEFA. And these are basically processes that just rely on the old hydrocracking technology that was already existing at these refineries. There's nothing new and innovative about making biofuels. They're just using different feedstocks in the same technology with some process changes that are necessary, but generally relying on the inputs of massive amounts of hydrogen to process the feedstocks. And all of this hydrogen is secured from the steam reformation of fossil gas. To work on our vocabulary a little bit more, let's make sure that we understand renewable diesel. The number one product being produced at these converted refineries now is a drop-in liquid diesel biofuel. It's drop-in because it doesn't require any modification of the motor of your vehicle. It doesn't need to be blended with other fuels. It can be blended. You can blend renewable diesel with fossil diesel, but it's not necessary. Biodiesel is a different product. It's made by a different process. And biodiesel, which people will still encounter regularly, has to be mixed and blended with either fossil gas or now the renewable diesel. The renewable diesel is chemically identical to fossil-based diesel. The other product that's coming out of these refineries now is sustainable aviation fuel. It's a very similar liquid biofuel to regular aviation jet fuel, but it can't be used on its own. It has to be blended pretty much in a 50-50 mix. Now, the fact that you're calling these biofuels renewable diesel or sustainable aviation fuel does give us a direct line of sight into the greenwashing that is surrounding the expansion of these products. I wanted to share this slide really quick. This is actually prior to the conversion of the refineries in 2019. This is from the tank farm next to the Phillips 66 refinery. This was a really dramatic incident, caused a lot of concern about fire spreading in the community. There were really very serious public health concerns when this fire happened. To note that this tank was holding ethanol, which is a corn-based liquid biofuel that in California is blended with gasoline. So ethanol, we're not going to go much into ethanol, but it is a product that's very much a part of the California liquid fuel energy system. But I wanted to drive home the fact that when we have these biofuels, there's nothing necessarily benign about them at all. The renewable diesel, chemically identical to petroleum diesel. If it spills in the bay, it's going to cause the same impact. Ethanol, in this instance, it was in a tank, a very large tank at the tank farm next to the refinery where they blend the fuels. It also caught on fire. And it's extremely dangerous. So I just want to put to rest any of these myths about how if it's biofuel, somehow it's benign and good for the environment. So when the refinery conversions were announced, the environmental review process under the California Environmental Quality Act was facilitated by Contra Costa County. Both the Phillips 66 refinery and the Marathon Nestle refinery are in Contra Costa County. And what we found was that both of these projects, billion-dollar projects, both of them, massive projects with thousands of pages of documentation, the actual environmental review was run in a total parallel sense. For instance, the draft environmental impact reports for both of these billion-dollar projects were released by the county within hours of each other. So we had the community scrambling to engage not only on $1 billion project, but two separate $1 billion refinery conversion projects. The environmental review process was definitely skewed by the county and state authorities to favor the project proponents, these transnational energy companies, and it also ended up in litigation. And in particular, the final environmental impact report of the Phillips 66 refinery was actually decertified by the court. It is to say that organizations sued about the quality of the environmental review of that refinery, and the courts found that the arguments of the litigants were so strong that the final version of the EIR was tossed out, but the county and the company were able to turn around in a matter of months and just drive through a revised version and get the Board of Supervisors of Contra Costa County to put their seal of approval on the project. And this was in early 2024. Fortunately, we do seem to have some support from staff at the Air District to continue to really scrutinize what's going on with the biofuel refineries in the Bay Area. We're not as confident that the California Air Resources Board is as committed to protecting public health, and we have some real doubts about how the California Energy Commission is characterizing these facilities. Let's make it really clear. Biofuel refineries pollute. Once again, this understanding, this myth that somehow that, because it's bio, it's natural is really, that is one of the harms that comes from the greenwashing associated with biofuels. But we have some real serious risks of flaring. And as a matter of fact, just historically to note that in November of 2023, there was a very serious fire at the Marathon Nesty biofuel refinery as it began to ramp up production. It was so serious that one worker ended up in the burn unit at UC Davis for nearly 9 months. They survived, but they were very seriously injured. And in March of this year, in March 2025 of this year, the United States Chemical Safety Board came out with a report that identified a number of really serious safety flaws, safety management flaws at the refinery, and also specifically identified a corporate culture that was not placing a priority on safety. But the renewable diesel, it's everywhere now. Despite our efforts to raise concerns during the environmental review process, these refineries have ramped up, and as well, because of the way the low carbon fuel standard works, diesel that meets the renewable diesel characteristics is being imported into California from all around the country and all around the world. So here we are to understand that this is all happened because of fuels policy at the federal level and at the state level. The renewable fuel standard was established about 20 years ago. It's a manner by which the production of these fuels can be incentivized and also offer some tax breaks for producers. The California Low Carbon Fuel Standard is a hermetically sealed incentive mechanism. It doesn't give taxpayer money to the fuel producers, but it has a system within which the producers of these fuels can gain credits to help cover for the debits that they earn for petroleum-based fuels. So the LCFS, very complicated, but definitely a financial reason why the producers have pivoted to these films. And then there's some stuff going around aviation and what's called the Carbon Offsetting Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, the CORSIA mechanism, which is also incentivizing these fuels. So I am just really at the halfway mark, maybe took a minute or two longer than I hoped, but I thought maybe that this could be a chance for us to open the floor for a couple of questions before I go into the second half of the presentation.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay, folks. Great stuff so far. Can we get a few questions going from at least my class for sure? So we don't have all the questions. James, go ahead. James and then Joshua. Josue.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for being here, Gary. My question to you, sorry, there's a lot of yappers in the library today. So my question to you is, what portion of the oils that are being refined in these plants are post-consumer? because obviously people against this program talk about deforestation and crops being grown solely for biofuel, but maybe advocates of it will talk about like, oh, it's used fry oil. So where's the truth there?
Well, technically the term is called used cooking oil, or we call it UCO for short. And it is definitely one of the feedstocks that Phillips 66 and Marathon Neste are using to gain LCFS credits. The fact is, though, is we can identify that that is one of the feedstocks, but because of the way that these companies rely on characterizing relevant data as confidential business information, we actually don't have any idea how much of it is being used. The other thing that we know is that there are some jurisdictions, such as Malaysia, that is providing used cooking oil to the global markets, that it is known now that they are selling more feedstock that they characterize as used cooking oil than they produce. And so we have partners in Europe, and what we have identified is that there is an actual very serious issue with fraud in which virgin palm oil is being passed off as used cooking oil. So the issue with used cooking oil is, though it might be the ideal feedstock for making a liquid fuel product, is that it is an incredibly constrained feedstock. There's not nearly enough of it to make the amount of fuel that these producers want to make. And so what they are using is vegetable oil. And they're using soy, canola, and international producers are using palm oil. So used cooking oil is it could be a good feedstock, but there's a lot of issues with fraud, and there's no way we could ever eat enough French fries to make the amount of fuel that they're making.
Josue,
Thank
can you
you.
go ahead with
Thank
your
you.
question?
Yeah. So my question is just a simple one. What's something like you wish the public better understood? Because I think when most people hear like renewable like diesel, they just assume that it's good for the environment. What's something that you wish like more people could understand? Like why maybe it might have like some drawbacks.
Yeah, I'm with you on, that's a very simple thing. I just wish people could see through the renewable greenwash because it's just been assigned to this, but talk about renewable fuels. It's the Martinez Marathon Renewable Fuels Facility. We still occasionally find ourselves in situations where we use that term, but there's nothing renewable about it. So I just kind of wish that the public, number one, was able to have, and that's why I'm really glad to be here, have a firmer grip on really how this explosion in biofuels has been occurring over the last 5 years, but that could also more easily see through the language that's being used: sustainable aviation fuel or renewable diesel. They're just tricks of the language that are being used to make people think that somehow these products are good for the environment.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
MC, if you could go, and then Jessica, and then Andres, and then Emily. Okay, MC?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Um, my my question was, I was just wondering that if renewable diesel can still cause the major environmental impact out of the state, how can we avoid shifting the harm elsewhere while still aiming for the cleaner energy?
That's a really good question. And really, that is at the heart of the work that we do at Biofuel Fuel Watch, in that we are very concerned about how these harms are being shifted out of the state, and that there are other communities and other landscapes that are paying the price for California being able to claim that they're doing something good for the climate. And when we get into the second half of my slides right here, I think I'll be able to share more specific information about exactly what these harms are and how we're tracking them.
Great.
Oh, thank
Good.
you.
Thank you. Jessica, and then Andres, and then Emily, and then we'll move on. Jessica?
Okay, yeah. So my question was more towards like the consequences of like to general public. So like what consequences are there of retrofitting these refineries for biofuels? That is like upticks in flaring, burning off excess gas, etc., will directly affect the general public. And kind of what is your view on how these consequences are valued compared the value of retrofitting these refineries compared to the public health of residents nearby and in the area?
That's another really excellent question. I'm so impressed with everyone's questions. I really appreciate it. One thing for our work too, and that for myself professionally, working with such a talented community that has been addressing refinery issues in the San Francisco Bay Area for so long, is that even though like the second half of my presentation here is going to focus on the feedstocks, generally we see when people discuss biofuels, they tend to really focus on the issues of land use change and the impacts from the feedstocks and everything that's happening with deforestation. And very little attention is actually being placed on the refineries. And we think it is very, very important to make sure that that part of the equation is understood. And without going into too many details, one of our major concerns about the refinery conversions is that the communities living next to these facilities are not being offered any relief. And if anything, then there is a dropping of the guard, as it were, from regulatory authorities because, oh, hey, we've converted these facilities to making biofuels now. Everything's green, everything's clean, when we know that it's not really the truth, because again, you mentioned flaring, and there are even some people here in our event today that have helped me understand the processing risks, but that because of the really high amounts of hydrogen that are required to move these vegetable oil and animal tallow and related feedstocks into a homogeneous liquid fuel product, is that there's a lot of heat involved. So there's a lot of flaring risk. There's some really serious public safety risks. And we need to keep the attention up on these refineries because, again, just because it's a renewable diesel that they're making, it doesn't mean that these refineries don't present a lot of risks to the community.
Thank you.
Thanks. Nice. Andres, and then Emily, and then we'll move on. Go ahead, Andres.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. My question is just it definitely seems like that there's like intentional or at the very least there's deception and the wording is deceptive in how they're branding some of the renewable diesel stuff. I'm actually just curious, in your opinion, do you believe this push for the renewable diesel was ever in good faith, or was this? Do you believe this was a cynical ploy from the beginning?
A little bit of both. I think there was a lot of good intention from many stakeholders who tried to promote the possible uptake of finding alternatives to fossil fuels. But I think the producers knew from the beginning that there were very serious environmental harms associated with these products. Frankly, I think the state knew. I've seen some very disturbing events happening at the California Air Resources Board when high-level executives leave the agency and within a matter of weeks are working for lobbyists representing industry. One has to step back and say, these guys are really pulling some shenanigans. And the other thing is we really think that the biofuel refinery phenomena represents an unholy marriage between big oil and big ag, and they are bonded together in this because keeping the public kind of fooled about what's going on is really good for their business. So without really minimizing the good intentions from many folks who've tried to work on these fuel policy the fuel policy development, I'm very cynical about how industry has approached this entire opportunity.
Thank you. Let's see, Emily.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for being here today. I'm under the assumption that the professor already did share my question earlier today with you, but I wanted to reiterate one more time, asking how you think regulators should balance the climate benefits claimed by renewable diesel refineries with global security and land use impacts. As you've mentioned, soybean or palm oil before, that would arise from scaling up biofuel production.
Well, that's at the heart of the debate that's happening around these issues in Sacramento right now. In early November, the Air Resources Board hosted a public forum on biofuels and land use change. And they brought in some experts who were really able to blow the lid on why the claims to climate benefits from these fuels are not, basically based on valid science. This happened only because the members of the board, when amendments to the LCFS were approved a year ago in November 2024, were expressing really concerns about where this was going, and they required that the staff host this public forum. So what we're seeing right now is that the Air Resources Board is really doubling down on the flawed methodologies that they rely on to characterize these fuel products as being somehow good for the climate, but that the body of evidence that is, built upon empirical data shows that there are really tremendous emissions impacts coming from the production of these fuels. There's a conflict right there, and ultimately, I just think that we need to get to a point politically where we can get the agency to back off from granting these products some sort of low emissions characterization, because all the evidence is showing otherwise. And we'll get into this quite a bit more with the last set of slides I have.
Thank you. And well, with that, that might be a good segue for maybe this is a good point for you to go ahead and continue on.
Great. And those are really good questions. And I really appreciate that we took the time to do that, because I can look at my clock now and I can say, probably Dr. Antinori, I have like 15 minutes to do the last section, or should I try to come in a little bit shorter?
I think we're good. If you want to do 15 minutes. Okay, we have to end at 4:45, but yeah, how about a quick 15 minutes?
Okay, I'll come in under. So we did try to focus on the refinery issue of making biofuels, which I had said earlier, oftentimes is not adequately discussed. It's really fundamental. It's really important to understand that you wouldn't have biofuels if it weren't for the refining of it. And it's really important to understand the impacts of the refining process, the emissions, the public safety impacts in that. That said, of course, then it's also to really understand the high emissions aspect of these biofuels, to understand why they're so detrimental to the global climate, why relying on biofuels is just making the biodiversity crisis worse. We need to take a good look at the feedstocks. And the other thing we need to look at are the human rights impacts, some of the social impacts that come from the production of these biofuels and the production of the feedstocks. So the first thing, of course, is for the other thing I want to hopefully really accomplish in this next set of slides for an environmental economics class is to leave people with at least a basic understanding of the economics of global deforestation. Okay, so let's start with this language right here. Soy is a high deforestation risk commodity. So there's a list of commodities that when the market shows how profitable that they can be, that it will drive an expansion of that sector. And so here we have an aerial photo, for instance, of a forested area in the Peruvian Amazon, and you can see the clean patches right there where forest has been cleared and soy is being planted. So technically, what we're talking about is indirect land use change. And this is a really important concept because it is also a little bit esoteric, because we start talking about market elasticities. We start talking about how these different commodities can actually replace each other and such. But let's be sure that we know that the high ILUC risk, or the high ILUC, people will say, or indirect land use change, are these food and feed crops that when their production expands into land with high biodiversity and high carbon values, such as forests, that we're causing, climate damage. The tremendous emissions from deforestation. And we've seen that soy farming has increased dramatically in South America. We know, for instance, that Phillips 66 specifically is bringing soy from South America into their refinery in Rodeo. And this issue of indirect land use change is one that we probably could spend many, many days studying, but we're just going to do a quick flyby on it here in this presentation. So I mentioned the market elasticities. This is a slide that we've kept around for quite some time because it really shows how even if we're just using soy grown in the US for making liquid fuels, that soy is already being used in a lot of products. And to make up for the soy that's being diverted to making fuel, the United States has been importing more palm oil for food products. They're not making fuel with it, but they're using it for a lot of things. And we know that the palm sector is one of those that most drives global deforestation. There's multiple links between these different sectors. In South America, the ag production, the soy production, and the livestock industry are completely very complicated interconnections there. Sometimes you'll see that a soy producer will say, well, we didn't deforest that land because it was cleared for cattle grazing. We're just coming in afterwards. But then you'll find out that it was the same investors who paid first for the cattle, the land clearing for cattle, and then came to plant soy. So they're very intertwined. So understanding these market elasticities in many different manners is really important for understanding the indirect land use change stuff. So essentially, the bottom line is to understand the increased demand for these commodities for food, feed, and fuel is what drives deforestation. Just to share this slide really quickly, this is from Global Forest Watch. From 2000 through about 2023, the data is a little bit old, but all the red is the commodity-driven deforestation. The issue with deforestation has remained acute, even if some of the rates of deforestation have declined from where they were 15 and 20 years ago. We're still losing forests. We're still losing forests at a very disturbing rate. Something that's not really addressed much, and the question about impacts that are passed on to others, how ostensibly we're fixing the climate, but there's impacts for others, is to understand the toxic pollution that's associated with the production of soy, for instance, with the genetically modified organisms of soy that are Roundup ready, permitting the applications of massive amounts of pesticides, and these the impacts on the public health of communities that live near these lands or work in these soy production areas are very severe. So we're talking about cancers, we're talking about birth defects. There are communities that are organizing underneath the banner of Los Pueblos Fumigados. We're talking about the fumigated people. So this is an aspect, a public health and human rights aspect of biofuels that needs more attention. And then the food impacts, the food insecurity that arises from the expansion of making fuel from these commodities is so. This is a study by Oxfam, and it's really very powerful in describing how the biofuel industry can impact food security and food prices. And actually here with the refinery conversions, those of us who are watching it very closely, we noticed that as soon as Phillips 66 announced their project in summer of 2020, global prices for soy oil went up, directly attributable to the announcement of that project. So a little bit of a snarky comment here, though, but the thing about liquid biofuels that is also something that people need to understand is like California is, in my opinion, kind of famous when it comes to climate about wanting to have your cake and eat it too. So people just want to be able to do the same thing forever. And that's why this reliance on technological innovations or something. How can I keep doing the same thing forever and ostensibly it won't hurt anybody? It's responding to climate change is going to be much more complex than that. I think my colleague Greg Karras is here. Greg has been absolutely instrumental in helping a lot of us who have been working on this issue to understand the implications of converting refineries to biofuels. And this is a graphic that Greg shared with some research that he did very early in the timeline, as it were, around the refinery conversions, in which the green line, as you can see across the bar graph right there, is the total land area of Indiana. And you can see then the colors on the right side of the different refineries in California. To note that this Altair Paramount refinery actually has closed down. They went out of business. But that the amount of feedstock that's required for these refineries to meet their production objectives requires a massive amount of land. For Biofuel Watch, then, we're a campaign organization, we're an advocacy organization, but we're watching very closely how so many sectors are looking to biofuels to supposedly decarbonize. Now we see that the shipping sector, we've been working very closely with partners around the International Maritime Organization because there's a major threat that the shipping industry could rely on biofuels to achieve their net zero goals. We know that aviation is there. So we got shipping, aviation, trains, trucks, heavy duty, off-road vehicles, all these different sectors that are looking to biofuels. And there is simply no way that there's enough land to be able to meet the energy demands of all these sectors with biofuels. A punchline slide right here from some of the screenshots I actually took at the public forum that CARB hosted at the beginning of November. But to really understand that when we have policy that demands that these commodities be used for making energy products, it will drive the price of these commodities up. When the price of these commodities goes up, the returns for developing agriculture go up. And if the returns are going up, then people are going to keep expanding the agricultural frontier. And that's why tropical deforestation occurs. Once again, any increase in demand for these commodities, for food, for animal feed, or for fuel products will drive deforestation. And this is kind of a complex slide here right towards the end. We're getting pretty close, but this is from a greenhouse gas emissions data report that the California Air Resources Board just released. They release this data every year. This data then is meant to show the changes from 2022 into 2023 and try to measure where California has been able to reduce emissions. This black line along here is the total sales of diesel, and this blue line right here is the fossil emissions from the emissions from fossil diesel, which you can see just dropping off very steadily right here ever since basically that the refinery conversions were announced. Even though more and more renewable diesel had been used, the emissions from fossil diesel have just dropped right off. So much so that from 2022 to 2023, California is claiming 5.1 million tons of emissions reductions simply because renewable diesel is being burned instead of fossil-based diesel. So all of this blue shade up here are the emissions that CARB tracks and tells us are occurring, but they say that these are emissions reductions because of their characterization of renewable diesel as carbon neutral. So they're not even getting into the intricacies of the different quote unquote carbon intensities with their different feedstocks and all. They've thrown that all aside and they're just going for a one-on-one supposed emission reduction because they claim that burning renewable diesel is carbon neutral. The atmosphere is laughing at us because they're just using a magic wand, because all the evidence is showing that when you consider, for instance, indirect land use change and so many of the other life cycle analysis factors, that a product like renewable diesel actually results in as much or even more greenhouse gas emissions than fossil-based diesel. So this is, to me, terrifying, because the state agency responsible for climate in the state is saying, hey, these emissions exist, but they don't count. So I encourage people that you'll have the slides and you can see most all these slides. I've tried to add some sort of source for the data so you can look at this stuff more. So what are we looking at here? Is this really a transition or is it a trap? My argument is that it's a pretty serious trap. To go through just the last couple of slides, I included this stuff. People are interested in these issues. Biofuel Watch is part of the Climate Land Ambition Rights Alliance. You can check out the website there. A lot of different work that we do around bioenergy, around carbon trading, around the human rights issues that are associated with land-based climate policy. And then also, we're really proud to have been part of the Hoodwink Collective. And you can check out Hoodwinked in the Hot House, biofuels, carbon capture, carbon trading, nuclear energy. There's a long list, geoengineering, a long list of all of these supposed responses to climate change that are being promoted by industry that are just false solutions. That's why we talk about being hoodwinked in the hot house. So that's it for my slideshow. I want to say thanks. And then I think we might still have a few more questions, perhaps, or any discussion. Also, I would like to say at this point that I'm really interested in being available to answer questions, but I'd also be totally comfortable if there was more of a conversation amongst the participants who are here in this event. So I'll leave this slide up for a second, but then I'll bail out of the screen sharing.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Well, let's get right to the questions. I think I saw Ayan put up her hand. Ayan, why don't you go first there, and then we'll say Sabrina, and then Tasia, and then we'll just keep going.
Hello, Mr. Hughes. My name is Ayantika. I would like to thank you for speaking with us today. My question surrounds the issue of sustainability. Obviously, there will be changes in land usage and water from the increased production of our feedstock for biofuel production. And essentially, all we are doing is just trading energy for energy. We're trading or substituting production of petroleum with the production of biofuels. So do you, in your professional view, regard this as actually being sustainable in the long run?
No, we definitely don't see biofuels as being sustainable. It's clear that you can make energy like this. It's obviously happening and at a large scale. We would, and there may be some instances in some local situations where there are some efficiencies that make bioenergy an adequate option. But it has to be very particular on the time and the place. And what we're seeing with the boom in liquid biofuels in California, there is nothing sustainable about it. There's nothing renewable about it whatsoever. So I'm sorry I don't have any real subtleties for my answer to your what is actually a very important question.
Thank you so
Sabrina?
much.
Hello, Mr. Hughes. Thanks for coming to speak to us today. My question is, you did talk about I don't know if it would be unethical, but the sourcing of the oils. As you said, like we could never use enough oil to really produce that much biofuel. Would you say that the negative effects on pollution, would it come more so from the refining of the oil or from the sourcing, such as palm oil?
Well, I appreciate your question because it is really congruent with our position at Biofuel Watch that there needs to be equal amounts of attention put on the refineries as there is on the feedstock production. Again, people talk about biofuels and they think about deforestation, but we really, really believe that people need to think about refineries. So I don't really know that there's like one or the other that is more important. We're working really hard to elevate, though, the understanding of the problems at the refinery level with making these fuels. But there's impacts all along the line that need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you.
Tasia?
Hi, thank you for presenting to us today. I guess you kind of answered the question I had, but just throughout your presentation, I couldn't help but wonder, what do you think is the most realistic first step California regulators or policymakers can take to make sure refinery biofuel projects don't continue harming us and having these detrimental effects? I know we can propose solutions, but I'm just wondering like what the first step would be in solving this issue.
Well, I think a really important first step is making sure that there is adequate scrutiny being put on these facilities. So, with that, I have been encouraged recently by the position of our local air district, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, or now they say just Bay Area Air District, in that there seems to be some interest in really making sure that these facilities are considered refineries and are regulated as refineries. We're not getting the same indications from, for instance, the California Energy Commission. The CEC doesn't talk about these as refineries anymore. So I think it's just a really, really important first step is to make sure that all interest look at these biofuel refineries as refineries, to know that they're making combustion fuels and that people really understand that when we're burning stuff, it has a climate impact. So after that, I think there's much more that can be done, but I think it's really fundamental that people just not fall into the trap of the illusion that somehow bioenergy is going to solve our problems.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Zachary?
All right. So my question is, how do you think that the lack of teeth of regulation in developed countries like the United States, but California specifically, impacts climate initiatives in poorer countries?
Well, I mean, there's historical issues, but and then there's also contemporary issues. I mean, let's not forget the reality in which we're living, where the federal government in the United States has become, one of the, barriers to making any progress on these issues at all. So, the United States definitely has responsibility. Right, it's always been difficult, even when we had favorable administrations, to get the United States to actually take responsibility. But right now, it's even harder. So, at the same time that I'm very critical of California authorities, I'm also very sober about the actual realities of what's going on with politics in our country. So I'm also aware that this is kind of a niche issue in some ways. So I don't necessarily put bioenergy as the issue by which I will decide whether or not political figure merits support. I think we're in quite a hole, as it were, and we need to stop digging. But as far as the United States becoming responsible on a global stage, it's going to take some real serious work here internally before we can get there. But it has to happen.
Thank you. Anthony?
All right. Hello, Mr. Hughes. First and foremost, thank you for taking time out of your day to present to us. It was a very insightful presentation. I'm one of the graduate students in this course. And with that, I'm currently in the process of finalizing my course project where I'm analyzing how California's cap and trade program and low carbon fuel standard have impacts on its gasoline prices. And through my research, and also even more so throughout this presentation, although both the programs aim to internalize carbon costs, it seems like the refinery conversions to renewable diesel may interact with these policies in ways that aren't necessarily fully transparent, as we've seen. So my question is, from your perspective, how should, say, economists and policymakers evaluate the net impact of these programs like cap and trade and low carbon fuel standard when refinery conversions may create hidden externalities that, say, aren't fully shown like in the fuel price data?
That's a really complex question, and I'd be interested in learning more about your findings as you keep working to find answers to that question. One thing that comes to mind, for instance, that I didn't mention at all, and I've brought this up with some of our legislators here in the Bay, is that no one seems to have really anticipated how the rules around cap and trade can be not the rules themselves are not affected, but what the implications are of these biofuel refineries for cap and trade. Specifically, the way cap and trade is set up is that the so-called biogenic emissions from making these fuels are exempted from the refinery's compliance obligation under cap and trade. In other words, they're being given a free pass because, again, carbon neutrality. But I looked at some of the emissions numbers from 2024 for the Marathon Neste refinery and that Phillips 66 refinery in Rodeo, and just doing like back of the napkin calculations with a low carbon price, it looks like the state is missing out on tens of millions of dollars of revenue by giving these biofuel refineries a free pass on having to be held accountable for their pollution from these biogenic emissions. So I'm probably not even getting close to answering your question as you phrased it, but I've thought your question was really thought-provoking because you are totally correct. There's a lot of unanticipated outcomes for both of these mechanisms, and there's some real indications that no one really fully understood how the explosion in production of renewable diesel was going to drive the low carbon fuel standard price down dramatically. It's way lower right now than where it was 5 years ago. So these mechanisms themselves are subject to unintended outcomes from the conversion of refineries to making biofuels.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Nathan?
Hi, thank you for taking time to present to us today. It's been really interesting. I'm also a grad student in the course, also wrapping up a project, and I'm looking at why California oil refineries are closing. And in my research, I've seen a lot of talk about switching refinements into biofuels and other sorts of refining in order to switch away to be more carbon neutral. And so it seems like legislators firmly believe that. And so I'm curious if biofuel production is just as bad as regular oil production, and there's no real incentive other than profits, why are legislators pushing that kind of change when it seems like it's not really changing anything per se?
Well, there's probably different reasons why legislators tend to parrot industry lines, and one of them is clearly that the oil industry loves biofuels. We're not really getting off of fossil fuels with this, and they're able to protect their stranded assets. So they're spending millions of dollars to advance their agenda with lobbyists in Sacramento, and our legislators are clearly really, easily seduced by their talk. But one thing for sure that we've learned in bioenergy, and this goes for the conversion of coal-powered electricity generating facilities to burning biomass, as well as the conversion of petroleum refineries to making liquid biofuels, is that there's a political convenience in this that elected officials take refuge in all around the world, because it becomes a very easy out. Oh, hey, we're responding to climate because carbon neutral. It's all going to be okay. But what it really is it's just very politically convenient. And then there's a stalling process in which these elected officials really don't want to come to grips with the evidence that demonstrates that they're incorrect. So the way that legislators don't seem very informed on these issues is definitely a challenge. It's really something that we're swimming upstream against. And of course, anyone working on any issues around oil and gas in California knows that these are incredibly powerful interests. And, again, speaking cynically, Chevron owns Sacramento. That's what we're up against. So this is why I really appreciate the opportunity to join the class. I looked at the syllabus. It looks like a really interesting class, and it's great to be able to share some thoughts with everyone. And also, I've learned quite a bit just from the questions.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. We have a couple more, actually 3 more students to get through. And I do want to say to our guests too, I want to have you guys ask questions and have the opportunity to. If you don't mind, if I can just take a few more questions from my students, that would be great. Wilson, and then Megan, and then Jishing, if you guys could be ready with your questions. Wilson, go ahead.
Hi, and can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yep.
All right, so thinking about like the future innovations, in your opinion, are there any new technologies or future fields that might avoid these land use and food security problems?
I mean, food security is really tied into land tenure. So we've seen that too just now coming out of the United Nations climate talks in Brazil, even though they were very disappointing. And even though indigenous people were elevated, it's, really important that we protect the Amazon and stuff. The talks were very disappointing. That said, Brazil did make a few gestures with land demarcation and fixing up the land tenure for indigenous peoples. And there's academic evidence now that shows that if you give rural peoples and indigenous peoples tenure to their land, that the land will be taken better care of and that their food security issues can be more easily addressed. So, I think sometimes we look from the way our society is obsessed with technology and engineering. We tend to look at climate change as an engineering challenge. But when we work on these issues from a global climate justice perspective, we find out that actually no, that climate change is a moral, ethical, and political challenge. And the technologies that we need really already exist. There is so much that can be done with photovoltaic solar panels. Now, every technology has its impact. I'm not going to say that, that's a zero impact energy, but the technologies that we need already exist, and finding the political will and the political power to really move towards that option, that's our biggest challenge. And I wanted to just point out that the chat has some great comments from a couple of people who made to join it here or have been, speaking honestly, real mentors for me. in this work. So I know we still have a couple of questions, but I direct people to the chat, and then I know that we're going over time as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Is it
you.
okay? Can you take a couple of more? Yes, thank you, Wilson. A couple more questions here, Gary?
Yeah, no, I've got time. I'm just
Okay.
attentive to the class staying late.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, hang in there, guys. Megan, can you ask your question, please?
Yes, my question is, if you had like a complete control over the situation and you could make, and you, what would your ideal solution to the Bay Area refinery be?
If I could be king for a day,
Yes.
I don't know that I'm really good in a unilateral sense like that. And then, ideally, if I could do anything, would be able to, construct a decision-making process whereby, these, you know, really powerful transnational energy interests could be a little bit removed from the discussion. It is so infuriating to me when I'm in a California Air Resources Board hearing and they open things up to public comment and we just hear from one fossil fuel company after another. And it's like, how are they the public here? So I think there's some restructuring of our political system that would be necessary, really trying to entrench equity and equal access to decision making. And then, for me, I also am a little bit idealist. And I definitely think that if we can embrace imagining like a different day-to-day life, maybe one that isn't quite so hurried and harried and rushed, and we could slow down. And this is where it gets kind of philosophical, touch the earth. But then that's where also, frankly, I use BART a lot in the Bay, and I think BART is great. We use the bus. I don't want to disparage any of our transit systems, yet at the same time, it's kind of embarrassing that we don't have better public transit. In California, the high-speed rail boondoggle, I mean, how many billions of money are being spent there for something that'll never function? So if I could be king for a day or queen or whatever it was, I would really like to shake things up in terms of really what's been normalized in terms of how we live our lives and how we do our politics.
Thank you. And our last student, Jishing, go ahead,
Good
please.
afternoon, Dr. Hughes. I have a question about some critics argue that renewable diesels can drive deforestation and other upstream environmental harms. How should we assess whether California refinery transition truly cut global emissions rather than shifting the damage elsewhere?
I'm sorry, I didn't really hear that question that well.
Repeat that last part, Jishing. Jishing? Yeah, can you just repeat that last little bit there where you asked, you said, how can California refineries, and then I missed that
The last part was how should we assess whether California refinery transition truly cutting global emissions rather than shipping the damage elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is to be able to have that real life assessment, like really have the data is, I think what we need to do is continue to engage with our agencies. And I mean, I don't think we have any other choice other than continuing to present the empirical evidence to the decision makers. Because our other choice is just to kind of abandon ship and give up on this, and that's not my style. I'm definitely going to keep working on this. So I think your question is really central to the dilemma. How can we make sure that we're actually achieving our climate goals and not just causing more harm? And so I think understanding the material, as everyone is doing in studying in a class like this, is really essential. But parallel to that, at the same time, we need to be developing the means by which we can collectively exercise political power and see these changes. Because the data alone and the evidence alone will not get us there. We have to have a political plan, and we have to be able to engage in politics collectively. So again, this is why I'm so impressed that Greg and Maureen came out, and that Dr. Antinori joined us in the Refinery Transitions Working Group, because it's been kind of an odd ad hoc effort over the years, but it's resulted in some really authentic, organic, and effective actions to at least move the needle on these issues. So remember, building evidence is really important, but if you don't have a political plan, it's the evidence itself will never be enough. It will never be enough, especially in this day and age right now, where like facts seem so ephemeral and we're being gaslit from every direction and stuff. So get the evidence, work the evidence, but make a political plan.
Fantastic. That's really great insight. So I think we actually got through all this. All my students have had the opportunity to ask a question. If anybody from our guests here would like to ask, please jump in. Maureen, Brennan, please.
Thank you. I won't hold you up too long, but I just want to tell a story that I heard an interview of one of the indigenous leaders at the recent COP. Her village was shut out. She was finally be able to get in, but her message was that Brazil is establishing a policy to privatize the rivers, and it is strictly for the transportation of soybean oil. They're going to deforest way up high. They're going to plant their soy, and they have to get it out. They have to get it to market. And so the plan currently is to privatize some of the major rivers in the Amazon. And that was a frightening thought, but it's another cost, economic cost for biodiversity for these villages. It's their land. It doesn't belong to us or Brazil. But anyway, it was just something to think about.
Thanks, Maureen. And just to make sure everyone knows that Maureen is a resident of Rodeo and is one of our local experts on the Phillips 66 refinery.
Thank you so much for being here.
Good stuff. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Maureen. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Last comment from Greg.
I just wanted to say thank you, Gary. Thank you, Professor Antinori, and thank you all for doing this. Just what Gary said, we need the science, we have the technology, but the real problem here is building political power to fix the problem. And I think that economic analysis has a unique role to play in that. So go for it, everyone.
Thank you. All right. Wow, this has just been so eye-opening. The depth of expertise here and information. We'll be digesting this, I'm sure, over the next few weeks here and moving forward indefinitely here. So maybe we should bring this to a close, and thank you all for staying a little bit extra, a little overtime here. It was just a really valuable discussion, and I'm just so grateful for everybody here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good luck in everything, and I'm sure we will be crossing paths again. So
nice.
All right.
Okay. Good luck with finals, everyone.
Yeah, right. You bet. Well, feel free. Anybody who's still here who wants to I'll hang out for a few minutes if anybody needs to follow a question, but feel free to take off. It's all good.
Okay, I'm going to leave. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Gary.
Okay, we'll be in touch. Peace.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Ciao.